Okay, gotta say, getting ready for this deep dive has really kind of shifted my view of Stoicism. I always pictured, the Stoics as these like emotionless, statue-like figures, just kind of gritting their teeth through whatever life threw at them.
Yeah, it's a pretty common misunderstanding, almost like reducing a whole philosophy down to a caricature. There's actually a lot more nuance there.
That's what I'm starting to see. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry you sent over is, wow, it's really in depth, like a Stoicism 101 guide almost, right?
Yeah, exactly. Covers all the basics, the history, even gets into some of the controversies. Good place to start our deep dive.
Absolutely. So can we just like debunk that emotionless myth right off the bat? What did the Stoics actually teach about emotions?
Well, they weren't against all emotions. They actually drew distinctions between different kinds of feelings. The ones they were cautious about were what they called the passions, sort of like excessive, irrational responses, things that throw us off balance. These they contrasted with what they called eupathei.
Eupathei. Okay, now that's a new one.
Think of those as good feelings, those rooted in virtue, like the joy you might feel when you see someone do something really selfless. Or the love you have for your family. Those are expressions of our virtuous nature, not disruptive passions.
So it's less about being, like a robot and more about understanding our emotions and managing them in a healthy way.
Exactly. They believe those passions, those stem from Salt's judgments about what is truly good and bad.
Wait, so then what did the Stoics consider to be good?
Well, they had a pretty radical idea. They believed that virtue was the sole good. Things like wealth, health, even pleasure, all those were considered indifference. Not bad necessarily, but not essential for true happiness either.
Wow, that's pretty intense. So if I'm stressing over a deadline at work, a Stoic would say I'm overreacting because, like, my job isn't actually that important in the grand scheme of things.
Well, it's not that your job isn't important. It's more about examining the beliefs behind that stress. Are you worried about the deadline itself? Or about what might happen if you miss it? What does success even mean in this context? Stoicism, it encourages us to question those assumptions and focus on what we can control, our effort, our intention, rather than outcomes outside of ourselves.
Okay, yeah, I'm starting to see how this could be actually, like, useful in everyday life. There's another thing that's been kind of tripping me up, though. The Stanford Encyclopedia entry. It mentions the Stoics were materialists. What does that even mean in a philosophical sense?
It means they believed everything in the universe, including our souls, even God, was made of physical stuff. There's no like separate spiritual realm or anything like that.
Wow. Okay, so how do they reconcile that with the existence of God?
Well, they had a very unique concept of God. They called it God or logos and described it as this pervasive, intelligent force. It kind of permeates everything in the universe.
So less of a guy in the sky and more of a universal energy.
Exactly. It's like a cosmic intelligence that's driving the constant change and evolution of the universe. And since they believed everything was interconnected, they also believed everything happens for a reason, that past events completely shape the present. In other words, they were determinists.
Hold on. So if everything's predetermined, how does free will fit into all of this?
That's a question that's still debated even today. The Stoics believe that while we may not have control over what happens to us, we can control how we respond. They believe that real freedom, it comes from accepting what's outside of control and focusing on what we can influence. Our thoughts, actions, our reactions to whatever life throws at us.
So not about changing the world, but changing how we relate to it.
That's a great way to put it.
This is kind of blowing my mind. Okay, we've covered emotions, this idea that virtue is the only good, and this materialistic God that's like a force of nature. Where do we even go from here?
Well, we've only just scratched the surface. To really understand Stoicism, we need to dive into the three pillars of their philosophy: physics, logic, and ethics.
Three pillars, you say. Sounds like the perfect framework for the rest of our deep dive. Let's unravel these pillars and see what wisdom we can unearth.
Okay, so let's tackle these three pillars of Stoic philosophy. And I think it makes sense to start with physics.
Yeah, for sure. That whole like materialistic God thing we were talking about, that really kind of threw me. I definitely need more context there.
It's definitely one of the trickier parts of Stoicism for, modern folks to wrap their heads around. Remember, they believed that everything in the universe, even God, was made of the same like fundamental stuff. They had this word for it, pneuma, sort of like this fiery, breath-like substance, but it was both matter and intelligence.
So it's not just that God is physical, but that like the physical world itself is intelligent.
Exactly. They saw the whole universe as one big living organism, and it's all permeated by this divine reason, this logos, and everything in it, from stars to our souls, it's all like part of this interconnected web.
Okay, yeah, I'm starting to see how this ties into their determinism then. If everything's made of that same intelligent substance, makes sense that it would all be connected and influenced by this overarching logos, right?
Precisely. They believe that the logos it guide everything towards a rational and purposeful end. Like there's a sort of cosmic plan unfolding, even if we can't always see it.
But doesn't that make us like puppets then? If everything's already decided by this logos, what's the point of even trying to make choices?
See, that's where Stoic physics gets really interesting. And they acknowledge that, yeah, a lot of external events are outside our control. But remember, they also believe that we have a spark of that divine logos within us in the form of our own reason.
So, like, we each have a little cosmic control panel inside.
You could think of it that way. And our ability to make choices, to exercise free will, that comes from how we use that reason. It's about aligning our thoughts and our actions with the logos, understanding the natural order of things and choosing to act in a way that's in harmony with that.
Okay, so like, I can't control that my flight got delayed, but I can control whether I like freak out about it or not. I can choose to get stressed, or I can choose to accept it and maybe find a way to use that extra time to get something done.
There you go. Perfect example. Stoic physics, it's about understanding that bigger picture, the way everything's connected, and realizing that true freedom comes from accepting what we can't control and putting our energy into what we can, our own thoughts and actions.
All right, physics check. We've got this material universe guided by divine reason, and our free will comes from aligning ourselves with it. Now, what about logic? I know they were big on reason, right?
Huge. Logic. For the Stoics, it wasn't just about, winning arguments. It was about training your mind to see reality clearly, to be able to tell what was true from what was false. They saw reason as like the most important tool we have for navigating the world.
But how do you even define truth in a system where everything's always changing and interconnected? Doesn't that make truth kind of subjective?
They actually had a very particular theory of knowledge. They believed that true knowledge, it comes from what they called cognitive impressions, these clear, distinct perceptions of reality that kind of get imprinted on the mind.
So it's not just like having an opinion, it's having a perception so clear, so undeniable. It's basically imprinted on your soul.
Exactly. And these cognitive impressions, they believed they were a direct reflection of the logos itself.
Okay, so true knowledge for the Stoics, it's basically like getting a glimpse of that cosmic reason shining through.
You could say that, and they actually developed a whole system of logic to help people identify and cultivate these cognitive impressions. They were really into language too, the way it reflects our understanding of the world. They had this word, lecta. It means the meanings behind words. And they thought understanding lecta was like crucial for understanding reality itself.
So they were philosophers and linguists. Impressive. But why was language so important to them?
Well, they saw language as a mirror of our thoughts, right? And they believed that if we could like refine our language, we could refine our thinking and get closer to that clear, unclouded perception of the truth.
I can see how that'd be a lifelong project. Okay, so we've got physics, this cosmic perspective on the universe and how we fit into it. We've got logic, the tools to understand that universe and figure out what's true. Where does ethics fit in?
Ethics, for the Stoics, it was like the culmination of it all. They thought that by understanding the nature of the universe and by training our minds to think clearly, then we could live a life in accordance with virtue.
And virtue for them meant living in harmony with that logos, right? With that universal reason.
Exactly. It's about aligning our actions with nature, with that universal reason that governs everything. That by living virtuously, we fulfill our true purpose as human beings.
It sounds simple in theory, but I'm guessing it's a bit more complicated to actually do. How did they define virtue? What did a virtuous life actually look like for them?
That's where we get into the nuts and bolts of Stoic ethics. They believe that virtue, it shows up in these four cardinal virtues: wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance.
Okay, those sound kind of familiar, like those classic virtues you see in a lot of philosophies and religions, right?
Exactly. But the Stoics, they gave them a very specific meaning in their system. So wisdom, for example, that's about using our reason to understand the world and make good judgments. Justice is about treating others fairly and upholding what's good for everyone. Courage isn't just about physical bravery, but about facing your fears, facing your challenges with inner strength. And then temperance, that's about moderating our desires, our impulses, living a balanced and moderate life.
So it's not just being a good person generally. It's about cultivating these specific virtues in every part of your life.
Precisely. And they believe that all these virtues, they're interconnected. You can't really have one without the others. They all come from the same source, living in line with the logos, with nature, with reason.
Wow, I'm already feeling like I need a whiteboard and some markers to map all of this out. But but even with these four virtues, wouldn't there still be a lot of gray areas? Like how to actually live them out? How did the Stoics deal with that? Did they have like any practical advice for everyday ethical dilemmas?
They did. That's where their concept of appropriate actions comes in. They believe that the virtues, those provide the overall framework, but each situation it needs its own careful thinking to figure out the most virtuous way to act.
So not about following like a set of rules. It's about using your reason to make the best choice in each situation.
Exactly. They thought that true virtue, it's not just knowing what's right, but having the wisdom and the courage to actually do what's right, even when it's hard.
I'm sensing a theme here. Physics, logic, ethics, it all comes back to using our reason to understand the world, make good choices, and act in a way that's in line with nature.
You got it. And that brings us to I think one of the most intriguing and maybe challenging parts of Stoic ethics, their concept of living in agreement with nature.
Okay, that sounds a little vague to me. What exactly did they mean by that? Did they all like go live in the woods and eat berries?
Not necessarily, haha. While they did think simplicity and living in harmony with the natural world was a good thing, living in agreement with nature, it had a much deeper meaning. It was about realizing that we're part of this bigger cosmic order, that we have a role to play in the grand scheme of things, and that our true happiness, it comes from fulfilling that role.
So not just about like environmentalism, but about understanding our place in the universe and living in a way that's in sync with that cosmic purpose.
You could say that it's about recognizing that we're individuals and we're part of something so much bigger than ourselves, and finding that balance, that harmony between our own needs and the needs of the whole. That's at the heart of Stoic ethics.
Wow, that's a powerful idea, but also kind of intimidating to be honest. Like how do we even begin to figure out what our role in this grand cosmic scheme is supposed to be?
That's a question that philosophers have been wrestling with for centuries, really. But the Stoics, they believe the answer's inside each of us. They believe that the logos, that divine reason, it's present in every human being. And by cultivating our own reason, by living virtuously, we naturally start to fulfill our role. We contribute to the overall harmony of the universe.
So it's not about like finding your destiny written in the stars. It's about focusing on becoming the best version of yourself. And in doing that, you naturally find your place.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And that's really the essence of Stoic ethics.
Okay, I'm feeling like we just like climbed a philosophical mountain here. We covered the three pillars. We tackled some big questions about free will and determinism. Even got into the nuances of Stoic virtue. But is there anything else we need to explore to really wrap our heads around Stoicism?
Well, no deep dive into Stoicism would be complete without without acknowledging the criticisms and the controversies around it. After all, no philosophy is perfect or universally accepted.
Ooh, I do love a good philosophical debate. Lay those controversies on me. All right, hit me with those Stoic controversies. What were some of the criticisms they faced?
Well, one of the biggest ones came from other philosophical schools, especially the Epicureans. They thought that this Stoic focus on virtue as like the only good, they thought that was too extreme, even a bit joyless.
Yeah, I can kind of see that. Like, if you're only focused on virtue, it seems like you might be missing out on other parts of a good life, right? Like enjoying a nice meal with friends or appreciating a beautiful sunset. Those things feel good even if they're not like directly connected to being virtuous.
That's exactly what the Epicureans argue. They thought that at pleasure, when it's, pursued wisely and in moderation, it was a natural part of a good life, essential even. They saw the Stoics as overly rigid, maybe even a little puritanical in their rejection of pleasure.
So it was like virtue above all else versus pleasure has its place.
Yeah, basically, in a nutshell. But the Stoics, they weren't totally against pleasure. They saw it differently. Remember, they believed that real happiness it comes from living in accordance with nature, with reason. And they said that when we align ourselves with virtue, then real lasting pleasure it naturally follows.
So it's not that they were anti-pleasure, it's more like they thought it was a result of living virtuously, not the goal in and of itself.
Exactly. And they warned against chasing pleasure for its own sake because they thought that could lead to, going overboard and ultimately being unhappy.
Okay, that makes sense. Still seems like a pretty tough standard, though. Are we really supposed to be thinking about virtue every second of every day?
That's another criticism you hear a lot about Stoicism, that it's too demanding, too hard to actually live out in the real world. And to be fair, they did set a pretty high bar. They had this idea of the sage, this ideal human being who embodies perfect reason and virtue.
So like a Stoic superhero.
Haha, yeah, no, in a way, the sage was their ideal, but they knew that very few people, if any, ever actually reached that level of perfection. They thought of it more as a guiding star, something to strive for.
So it's not about being perfect, it's about the journey of becoming more virtuous.
Exactly. And they believe that even if we never become sages, the very act of trying to be more virtuous, of making an effort to align our lives with reason and nature, that in itself brings a kind of fulfillment.
I like that. It's encouraging even if it's a little daunting. Were there any criticisms of Stoicism from like within the school itself?
Oh, for sure. Stoicism, it wasn't just this one big block of thought. Different Stoic thinkers throughout history, they had their own takes on things, and they didn't always agree. For example, there was some debate about the idea of oikiosis, which we talked about earlier.
Right, the natural inclination to care for ourselves. What was the debate about?
Well, some Stoics thought that goikiosis it mainly referred to like self-preservation, while others they thought it had a broader meaning, that it extended to caring for other people, even for humanity as a whole. And this debate it gets to a kind of tension within Stoicism. How do we balance our own individual needs and wants with the needs of the community, with trying to achieve justice for everyone?
That's a question for the ages, right? And it's definitely something I think about in my own life. Like, how much should I focus on my own goals and ambitions versus doing things that contribute to something bigger than myself?
Exactly. And there's no easy answer to that. But the Stoics, they give us a framework for thinking about these questions. They remind us that we're both individuals and part of a larger, interconnected web, and they encourage us to use our reason, not just our own personal desires, to guide our actions.
This has been so insightful. I feel like I have a totally new understanding of Stoicism now, from its basic ideas to the debates and criticisms around it.
It's been a pleasure exploring all of this with you, but remember, this is just the beginning. Stoicism, like any philosophy, it's meant to be engaged with, to be questioned, to be applied to your own life.
You're absolutely right. It's not about memorizing rules. It's about using these tools to navigate life, to make choices that are aligned with reason and virtue and our place in the grand scheme of things.
Well said. And who knows, maybe in the process you'll even find a bit of that stoic serenity amidst all the chaos. Keep diving deep, keep questioning, and most importantly, keep living according to what you believe is right and true.
I will definitely keep that in mind. Thanks for taking me on this deep dive into Stoicism. It's been amazing.